First thing that we have to remember is the Gemara says, the Talmud says that all punishment comes to the world, all difficulties come to the world for the sake of the Jewish people. It doesn't mean that we're to be blamed directly for what happens as if we ourselves carried it out, but it means that anything that happens in the world is a function of divine providence. And the point of that divine providence is to spark something in Jewish consciousness to bring us back to our roots and bring us back to the purpose of our existence and the reason for which God took us out of Egypt in the first place to give us Torah, which is to be a light unto nations. And if we cease to be a light unto nations and we drift and we assimilate and intermarry and all these things, then God has to find a way to somehow bring us back in. Without prophets and prophecy to inform us what God wants from us, He'll always do something in a way that whatever the result is going to be, somehow through it we'll be able to understand the message He's trying to give to us. And if Jewish life in America has become more uncomfortable, and if anti-Semitism is on the rise, and if the Jewish people are getting more flack because of what happened on September 11th and since then, which is definitely the case today, then that can be taken as a message from heaven that perhaps, it's a very bold statement to make at this stage of history, but one can make that statement now, that perhaps maybe the final stage of the last Jewish exile is coming to an end. Talmud tells us that the Mashiach and the redemption will come based upon a Shemitah cycle. Shemitah cycle is the 7-year cycle that the Torah teaches us about, that every 7 years the land of Eretz Yisrael has to remain fallow. We don't work the land. We just finished a Shemitah year this previous year, 5761. And according to the Talmud, which deals with the issue, it mentions an order of events. The first year there's going to be rain in some places, rain not in other places. The second year there'll be partial famine. The third year, fourth year, fifth year. Finally, the Talmud says in the 6th year there'll be voices. And Rashi explains voices means that people will speak about the imminent arrival of Mashiach, that there'll be a lot of discussion about Mashiach's coming. And the Talmud says in the 7th year there'll be war. And the 8th year, that's the year that Mashiach will finally come. Ben David will finally come. Rav Yosef asked a question to Abaye. There have been many Shemitah cycles. I mean, every 7 years is another Shemitah cycle. There's been many events. How do we know that this is the one that Mashiach is going to come? So Abaye answers back, he says, yeah, but how many actually have voices in the 6th year and war in the 7th year? The year 5760 corresponded to the Western year 2000. And for those who've already forgotten, the year 2000 was the year of the famous millennium bug, Y2K. We spent $64 billion and a lot of hype and discussion about the potential damages of Y2K. In the end, nothing really happened. But from a Torah perspective, a tremendous amount happened. First of all, it was also a year of tremendous natural disasters. That's the earthquake in Turkey killing 17,000 people. There was the uncharacteristic rainfall in Venezuela, which also wiped away a lot of people. The hurricanes, it was a very rough year historically. But perhaps the most important thing about Y2K is that it did not pass unnoticed by the Jewish people. Specifically because there were 2 predictions made by 2 great rabbis hundreds of years ago. One rabbi, the Rokeach, predicted in the year 5760 there was going to be a great flood that would wipe away the whole world except for the righteous people and purify the world. Independently, another rabbi who was talking about how much undrawn water is necessary for mikveh mentions that it takes 5,760 eggs worth of volume of undrawn water, which doesn't come from a pipe. And he mentions that for this reason, in the year 5,760, there'll be a flood that will come to purify the world like a mikveh. Now, these predictions really wouldn't mean anything. If the year 5760 had come and there was nothing happening out of the ordinary in that year, we'd look at the quotes and look at the predictions. Maybe a few people would speak about them, but there'd be nothing to make them feel imminent. The amazing thing is that when these quotes began to surface and we had the potential problem of Y2K, all of a sudden people began to ask the question, does the flood mean not a water flood, but a flood of chaos? Is it possible that Y2K may be the mechanism to bring into fulfillment these predictions? That was the whole issue. And because of that, and plus the natural disasters, everybody began discussing the possibility that maybe 5760 was a year of Mashiach's arrival. In the end, the year passed. It didn't happen. There was disappointment, but it passed. Almost immediately on Rosh Hashanah of the year 5761, there was rock throwing from the Temple Mount. At the time we thought it was only an incident that was going to pass. Looking back, now we can see that that was the beginning of the new Intifada, the beginning of a whole new war between the Jews and the Arabs. That was the terminology being used at the end of the year. It's war, terrorism and killings. So all of a sudden we look back and we say, you know, significant, history is moving very fast. Things are happening against what we would think is to be normal and natural. And all of a sudden we realize, you know, maybe the point of the Rokeach and the Chesed L'Avraham was not that Mashiach would come that year, but there was a prerequisite. There had to be kolos, there had to be voices in the year 5760, because it was the 60th of the Shemitah cycle, to combine together, taking the Chesed L'Avraham and the Rokeach on one hand and Y2K and combining them. This created a consciousness that forced people, literally forced people who normally didn't talk about these things necessarily, to begin discussing the possibility that maybe redemption's at hand and Mashiach might not be too far away. So it doesn't make a difference that God knew that Y2K would be a dot. The point is we believed it could be something. When God gives a person or a people a test, He takes advantage of our assumptions. The point of that year is to make us think about the possibility, to change the consciousness of the Jewish people, to bring us around the corner we otherwise wouldn't have turned if it wasn't for Y2K and these two predictions. At the end of the year, it's over, and suddenly there's a war. Just like that. Just like the Gemara said. So at the end of the 7th year, and this war is taking place, and terrorism is increasing, and the pressure on Israel is getting worse, I ask myself, this is true, and the Jewish people have yet to do tshuva, right? Have yet to return to God in Torah, which means that's the path of Gog and Magog. I said, you know, what would God do to change history so quickly that within 1 year, the world would look different, and the potential for Gog and Magog, God forbid, could exist?